Have you ever wondered what happens when the most dangerous criminals on Earth get locked away? Well, Mexico just answered that question in the most terrifying way possible. They've opened a prison so extreme, so psychologically devastating, that even seasoned cartel assassins who've dismembered their enemies are begging not to be sent there. We're talking about a facility where grown men who once controlled entire cities now break down crying in isolation cells smaller than your bathroom. This isn't your typical correctional facility. This is psychological warfare disguised as justice, and what's happening inside these walls will shock you to your core. From inmates dying of preventable diseases to guards who are too terrified to enter certain sections, this place represents a new level of institutional brutality that makes maximum security prisons look like summer camps. But here's what's really disturbing. Mexico didn't just build this fortress of despair overnight. They transformed an existing prison that was once run like a small town by the inmates themselves, complete with restaurants, shops, and entertainment venues. What changed everything was one man's vision of absolute control, and the methods being used are so extreme that they're raising questions about human rights violations on an industrial scale. In this investigation, I'm going to take you inside the most restrictive prison system ever created in the Americas. You'll meet inmates who've been reduced to shadows of their former selves, guards who live in constant fear, and discover how this facility has become ground zero for Mexico's war against organized crime. But most importantly, you'll learn why this approach might be creating more problems than it solves. The facility I'm talking about sits just miles from the United States border, in a region where violence has become so normalized that children grow up knowing the sound of automatic weapons better than nursery rhymes. This prison was designed to house the worst of the worst, the shot callers and kingpins who once moved billions of dollars worth of narcotics across international borders. These aren't ordinary criminals we're discussing. These are individuals who commanded armies of foot soldiers, corrupted government officials at the highest levels, and turned entire neighborhoods into war zones. Men who tortured rivals for sport and considered human life as disposable as yesterday's newspaper. Yet even these hardened killers are being broken by what they're experiencing behind these walls. The transformation of this facility began in earnest when authorities realized that traditional incarceration methods weren't just failing, they were actually making the problem worse. Cartel leaders were continuing to run their organizations from behind bars, ordering hits, managing drug shipments, and recruiting new members. The prison had essentially become a corporate headquarters for criminal enterprises. But the solution they implemented goes far beyond standard maximum security protocols. We're talking about a system that deliberately strips away every aspect of human dignity and social interaction. Inmates are confined to concrete boxes with no windows, no natural light, and minimal human contact for months or even years at a time. The psychological impact is so severe that mental health experts are comparing it to torture. The daily routine in this facility is designed to break the human spirit. Inmates wake up in darkness, eat meals that barely meet nutritional requirements, and spend 23 hours a day in cells where the walls are covered with mold and the air is thick with humidity. Exercise consists of 2 hours per week in a concrete yard with no equipment, no interaction with other inmates, and constant surveillance. Medical care is practically non-existent. Inmates report dying from treatable conditions because healthcare is viewed as a privilege rather than a right. Dental problems go untreated for years. Mental health services are completely absent, despite the fact that prolonged isolation is known to cause severe psychological damage, including hallucinations, paranoia, and complete mental breakdown. The isolation isn't just physical, it's linguistic and cultural as well. Foreign inmates, including Americans who got caught up in the Mexican justice system, find themselves completely cut off from any form of communication. No translators, no English-speaking staff, no way to contact family members or legal representation. They describe feeling like they've been erased from existence. What makes this situation even more disturbing is that not everyone in this facility is a hardened criminal. The system is so overwhelmed and the classification process so flawed that people convicted of minor offenses are being subjected to the same treatment as cartel bosses. Imagine being sentenced to years of psychological torture for stealing a car or getting caught with a small amount of drugs. The guards working in this facility face their own unique form of hell. They're caught between following orders from above and dealing with inmates who still have connections to powerful criminal organizations on the outside. Many correctional officers report receiving death threats against their families, forcing them to make impossible choices between doing their jobs and protecting their loved ones. The corruption that plagued the old system hasn't disappeared, it's simply adapted to the new environment. Despite all the security measures and isolation protocols, cartel influence still seeps through the cracks. Money changes hands, contraband finds its way inside, and the power dynamics between different criminal organizations continue to play out in the shadows. What's particularly chilling is how this system affects human behavior over time. Inmates who enter with some semblance of humanity often emerge as something entirely different. The prolonged isolation, the constant stress, and the complete lack of hope create individuals who are more damaged and potentially more dangerous than when they went in. Instead of rehabilitation, this approach seems to be manufacturing psychological time bombs. The facility's director takes pride in what he calls bringing order to chaos, but critics argue that this level of control comes at an unacceptable human cost. International human rights organizations are beginning to take notice, raising questions about whether these methods violate basic standards of human dignity that are supposed to be universal, regardless of what crimes someone has committed. The ripple effects extend far beyond the prison walls. Family members of inmates describe the anguish of not knowing if their loved ones are alive or dead. Wives, children, and parents are cut off from any meaningful contact, creating secondary victims of this harsh justice system. Some families have spent their life savings trying to get basic information about their incarcerated relatives. This isn't just about punishment anymore, it's about something much darker. The systematic dehumanization happening in this facility represents a fundamental shift in how society deals with its most problematic members. Instead of attempting to address the root causes of criminal behavior, this approach simply warehouses people in conditions that would be considered torture in many contexts. The economic costs are staggering as well. Maintaining this level of security and isolation requires enormous resources, yet there's no evidence that it's actually reducing crime rates or making communities safer. If anything, the brutalization of inmates may be creating more problems when they're eventually released back into society, assuming they survive their sentences with their sanity intact. Coming up, we'll explore the shocking history of how this prison evolved from an inmate-controlled paradise into the concrete nightmare it is today, and reveal the disturbing accounts from former inmates who witnessed the transformation firsthand. The story of how this fortress of despair came to exist reads like something out of a dystopian nightmare, but the reality is far more complex and disturbing than any fiction writer could imagine. To understand what's happening today, we need to go back to a time when this same facility operated under completely different rules, when inmates literally ran their own miniature society behind bars. Picture this scenario if you can. The same concrete walls that now contain Mexico's most feared criminals once housed what inmates called their own little town. We're talking about a fully functioning economy, where prisoners operated legitimate businesses, ran restaurants that served decent food, and even maintained entertainment venues where they could relax after a long day of whatever constituted work in their upside-down world. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Where today's inmates fight over access to basic hygiene products and clean water, the previous generation of prisoners enjoyed amenities that would make some hotels jealous. They had access to computers, maintained social clubs, large sections of the facility. Some could move freely throughout, even hiring other inmates as employees for their various enterprises. But this wasn't some progressive rehabilitation program designed by criminal justice experts. This was pure chaos, masquerading as order, a system where the strongest and most connected inmates created their own hierarchy, while the weakest suffered in ways that never made it into official reports. The violence was constant, unpredictable, and often spectacular in its brutality. The transformation didn't happen gradually. It came like a sledgehammer to everything the old system represented. In a single decisive action, authorities demolished every shop, shuttered every business, and declared that from that moment forward, the state would control every aspect of prison life. No more inmate-run enterprises, no more freedom of movement, no more pretending that criminals could govern themselves. What replaced the old chaos was something far more sinister, a system of control so complete, so all-encompassing, that it touches every moment of an inmate's existence. Every breath is monitored, every movement tracked, every interaction scrutinized by guards who themselves seem trapped by the very system they're supposed to operate. The architect of this transformation is a man who views his role not as a prison administrator, but as someone waging psychological warfare against the criminal mind. His philosophy is simple but terrifying in its implementation. Break them down completely, strip away every vestige of their former identity, and rebuild them as something manageable and controllable. Under his watch, the facility has become what critics describe as a human filing system. Inmates are processed, categorized, and stored like inventory in a warehouse. The goal isn't rehabilitation or even punishment in any traditional sense. It's the erasure of the person they once were, replacing it with something that can be controlled through fear and isolation. The methods being employed go far beyond anything most people would consider acceptable, even for the worst criminals. We're talking about sensory deprivation that drives people to the edge of madness, nutritional restrictions that border on starvation, and medical neglect that amounts to a slow death sentence for those unlucky enough to develop serious health problems. The daily schedule is designed to maximize psychological pressure. Wake-up calls come at random hours to prevent inmates from establishing any sense of routine or normalcy. Meals are served at irregular intervals, making it impossible to anticipate when food might arrive. Exercise periods are unpredictable and often cancelled without explanation, leaving inmates uncertain about when they might next see daylight. Sleep becomes a luxury rather than a basic human need. Cells are kept artificially bright or completely dark for extended periods, disrupting natural circadian rhythms and causing disorientation that makes it difficult to track the passage of time. Some inmates report losing track of days, weeks, even months in this artificial environment. The psychological impact manifests in ways that would shock anyone who still believes in basic human dignity. Grown men who once commanded respect through violence and intimidation are reduced to begging guards for basic necessities like soap or toilet paper. Former cartel leaders who controlled territories larger than some countries now break down crying over trivial slights or perceived injustices. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Despite all these extreme control measures, the very criminal organizations this system was designed to neutralize continue to operate with frightening efficiency. The isolation hasn't eliminated cartel influence, it simply forced it to evolve into more subtle and sophisticated forms. Communication still flows between the inside and outside world through channels that would impress intelligence agencies. Orders are still given, territories are still managed, and violence is still coordinated from within these supposedly impenetrable walls. The cartels have adapted to the new reality faster than the authorities who created it continue to change. Money hands. Though the currency has shifted from cash to favors, information, and protection. Guards who thought they could remain neutral quickly discover that neutrality isn't an option when your family's safety depends on making the right choice between competing criminal factions. The corruption hasn't been eliminated, it's been driven deeper underground, where it's harder to detect but potentially more dangerous. Instead of the obvious bribes and kickbacks of the old system, we now have a shadow economy based on fear, intimidation, and the promise of future rewards for those who cooperate. What makes this particularly disturbing is that many of the guards are victims themselves, trapped in a system that demands they choose between their conscience and their survival. They witness daily human rights violations but know that speaking out could result in their own families becoming targets. The facility has become a breeding ground for a new type of criminal psychology. Inmates who might have been salvageable under different circumstances are being transformed into something far more dangerous than what they were when they arrived. The extreme isolation and dehumanization are creating individuals who have nothing left to lose and no reason to care about the consequences of their actions. Mental health experts who have studied similar facilities warn that the long-term effects of this approach could be catastrophic for society. When these inmates are eventually released, they'll return to communities as damaged individuals with no social skills, no ability to function in normal society, and often with a burning desire for revenge against the system that destroyed them. The human cost extends far beyond the prison walls into families and communities that are left to deal with the aftermath. Children grow up without fathers, wives become widows in all but name, and entire neighborhoods live under the shadow of an institution that seems designed to perpetuate rather than solve the problems it was meant to address. The temperature control in these facilities is used to create additional psychological pressure. Cells alternate between stifling heat that makes breathing difficult and bone-chilling cold that prevents sleep. Inmates never know what conditions they'll face from one day to the next, creating a state of constant anxiety and physical discomfort that wears down mental resilience over time. Personal hygiene becomes a privilege that must be earned rather than a basic human right. Access to showers is limited to a few minutes per week, often with water that's either scalding hot or ice cold. Soap, toothbrushes, and toilet paper must be purchased with money from outside, creating a two-tier system where those without family support gradually deteriorate both physically and mentally. The medical neglect in this system reaches levels that would shock healthcare professionals anywhere in the world. Inmates with serious injuries are left to heal on their own, often resulting in permanent disabilities that could have been prevented with basic treatment. Chronic conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure go untreated, leading to complications that can be fatal. Dental care is virtually non-existent, with inmates reporting teeth falling out from untreated infections and abscesses. The pain from dental problems becomes another form of psychological torture, a constant reminder of their powerlessness and the system's indifference to their suffering. Mental health services are not just inadequate, they're completely absent from the facility's operations. Inmates experiencing psychological breaks from the isolation and stress are left to cope on their own, often making their conditions worse through desperate attempts at self-treatment or self-harm. The communication blackout extends beyond just phone calls and visits. Letters are heavily censored or simply discarded without ever reaching their intended recipients. Legal correspondence is delayed or lost entirely, making it nearly impossible for inmates to maintain contact with their attorneys or pursue appeals of their cases. For foreign inmates, the isolation is even more complete. Language barriers make it impossible to communicate basic needs to guards or medical staff. Cultural differences are not acknowledged or accommodated in any way. These individuals often spend years without speaking to another person who shares their language or understands their background. The visiting restrictions are designed to gradually sever all ties between inmates and their families. Visits are limited to a few minutes per month, conducted through reinforced glass barriers that make physical contact impossible. The psychological impact on children who watch their fathers disappear behind these walls cannot be overstated. Family members describe the anguish of not knowing whether their loved ones are alive or dead for months at a time. Phone calls are rare and heavily monitored, creating conversations that feel artificial and strained. The emotional toll on spouses and children creates secondary victims of this harsh justice system. The economic impact on families is devastating as well. The cost of traveling to remote prison locations, combined with the expense of purchasing basic necessities that should be provided by the facility, drains family resources and often forces difficult choices between supporting supporting incarcerated relatives and meeting basic needs at home. What's particularly disturbing is how this system affects the guards and staff who work within it. Many correctional officers report developing symptoms similar to those experienced by inmates, including sleep disorders, anxiety, and depression. The constant exposure to human suffering takes a psychological toll that extends far beyond working hours. Staff turnover rates are extremely high, with many guards quitting after just a few months on the job. Those who remain often develop coping mechanisms that involve emotional detachment and dehumanization of the inmates under their control. This creates a cycle where brutalization becomes normalized and even celebrated as professional competence. The corruption that was supposed to be eliminated by this new system has simply evolved into more sophisticated forms. Instead of obvious bribes, we now see complex networks of favors and obligations that bind guards, administrators, and inmates together in webs of mutual dependence and fear. Drug smuggling continues despite the extreme security measures, with contraband finding its way inside through methods that would impress professional smugglers. The desperation created by the harsh conditions makes inmates willing to take enormous risks for even small amounts of substances that can temporarily ease their psychological pain. Violence hasn't been eliminated, it's been driven underground, where it's harder to detect but potentially more savage when it erupts. Inmates describe a constant state of tension, where the slightest provocation can explode into deadly confrontations. The isolation makes it easier for stronger inmates to victimize weaker ones without detection. The gang dynamics that authorities hope to disrupt have simply adapted to the new environment. Criminal organizations maintain their hierarchies and territorial disputes even within the confines of individual cells. Orders are still passed between different sections of the prison through elaborate communication networks that rival military intelligence operations. What makes this situation even more tragic is that many inmates entered this system with the possibility of rehabilitation. Young offenders who made mistakes but retained some connection to their humanity have been transformed into hardened criminals by the very institution that was supposed to reform them. The recidivism rates from facilities using these methods suggest that the extreme approach is not just failing to solve the problem, it's making it worse. Inmates who survive their sentences and return to society are often more damaged and dangerous than when they went in, creating new victims and perpetuating cycles of violence and crime. International human rights organizations are beginning to document conditions in this facility, raising questions about whether these methods violate international treaties and conventions that Mexico has signed. The response from authorities has been to restrict access and limit information flow, making it difficult for outside observers to verify conditions inside. The secrecy surrounding this facility extends to official statistics about deaths, suicides, and serious injuries among the inmate population. Families often learn about their loved ones' deaths weeks or months after they occur, with official explanations that raise more questions than they answer. Coming up next, we'll examine how this extreme approach to incarceration is actually strengthening the very criminal organizations it was designed to destroy, and reveal the shocking ways that cartel operations continue to function even from within the most secure sections of this facility. The most disturbing aspect of this entire system may be how spectacularly it's failing to achieve its stated goals while creating new problems that could plague Mexican society for generations to come. Despite the iron grip of control that authorities believed they had established, the criminal networks this system was designed to neutralize have proven remarkably adaptable. What we're witnessing is essentially an arms race between institutional security measures and criminal ingenuity, with the cartels consistently staying one step ahead of their captors. The communication networks operating within this facility would impress intelligence agencies around the world. Messages flow between different sections through methods that exploit every weakness in the system. Inmates have developed elaborate codes using seemingly innocent activities like exercise routines, meal arrangements, and even the timing of their movements to convey complex instructions to associates both inside and outside the prison walls. One of the most shocking revelations is how cartel hierarchies have not only survived but actually strengthened under these extreme conditions. The isolation that was meant to break command structures has instead forced these organizations to become more efficient and disciplined. Leaders who once relied on face-to-face meetings and obvious displays of power have learned to exercise control through subtle signals and carefully orchestrated actions. The financial operations of these criminal enterprises continue to function with frightening precision. Money laundering schemes, territory management, and even new recruitment efforts are coordinated from within cells that are supposedly cut off from the outside world. The desperation created by harsh conditions has made guards and staff more susceptible to corruption, not less. What's particularly alarming is how violence is still being ordered and carried out despite the extreme security measures. Hits are planned and executed on the outside based on decisions made in isolation cells. The communication lag created by security protocols sometimes makes these orders even more dangerous, as they can't be easily recalled or modified once they've been transmitted. The psychological warfare being waged against inmates has created an unintended consequence that authorities never anticipated. Instead of breaking the criminal mind, the extreme conditions are forging it into something harder and more resilient. Men who entered the system with some remaining connection to conventional morality are being transformed into something far more dangerous. The isolation protocols that were designed to prevent gang coordination have actually made these organizations more secretive and sophisticated. Unable to rely on traditional communication methods, cartel members have developed new techniques that are harder to detect and intercept. The cat-and-mouse game between security forces and criminal networks has reached new levels of complexity. Former law enforcement officials who have studied this phenomenon warn that the facility is essentially functioning as an advanced training ground for criminal leadership. The pressure cooker environment is producing individuals with enhanced skills in deception, manipulation, and strategic thinking. When these inmates are eventually released, they return to their organizations with capabilities that far exceed what they possessed before their incarceration. The recruitment efforts of criminal organizations have adapted to these new realities as well. Knowing that their leaders face the prospect of extreme incarceration, cartels are investing more heavily in developing multiple layers of command structure. The loss of individual leaders no longer cripples these organizations the way it might have in the past. Perhaps most disturbing is how the facility has become a symbol of strength rather than deterrence for criminal organizations. Surviving the extreme conditions is viewed as a badge of honor within cartel culture. Members who endure years of psychological torture return to their organizations with enhanced status and credibility that makes them even more dangerous leaders. The international implications of this approach are beginning to concern law enforcement agencies throughout the region. As Mexican cartels adapt to extreme incarceration methods, they're sharing these defensive techniques with criminal organizations in other countries. The innovations developed to survive this harsh system are being exported along with drugs and weapons. Intelligence analysts report that the communication methods pioneered in this facility are now being used by criminal networks across Central and South America. The extreme security measures that were supposed to be Mexico's secret weapon against organized crime are instead becoming a training manual for criminal organizations worldwide. The economic costs of maintaining this level of security are staggering and ultimately unsustainable. The resources required to monitor, control, and contain inmates under these conditions far exceed what most correctional systems can afford long-term. Yet reducing security measures would likely result in immediate and catastrophic failures that could destabilize the entire prison system. So here we are, faced with a system that promised to break the power of Mexico's most dangerous criminals, but has instead forged them into something even more formidable. This extreme prison represents more than just failed policy. It's a glimpse into what happens when the pursuit of control overrides basic humanity. The real question isn't whether this facility can contain the monsters it was designed to hold, but whether we're creating new ones in the process. Until Mexico addresses the roots of why people turn to crime in the first place, no wall will ever be high enough, no cell ever secure enough. The war continues, and the casualties keep mounting on both sides.